What's good, my tribe? This is day 49 of the 90-day YouTube challenge. And today I thought I'd share a little bit about a book that I'm currently reading. It's called DMT and the Soul of Prophecy. This is Rick Strassman, Dr. Rick Strassman's second book. For those of you who are not familiar with Rick, he was the sort of the modern kind of resurgence of psychedelic research back in the 1990s. Between 1990 and 1995, he conducted a study on DMT and sort of kind of reopened this field of research, which had been sort of dormant since the 60s when a lot of the psychedelics became illegal. And yeah, so there's been a documentary called DMT and the Spirit Molecule. Dr. Rick Strassman also wrote a book of the same title, and he found in his studies, originally he was looking for a sort of biochemical source of psychedelic and spiritual experiences. And so his hypothesis was that it's actually DMT and the endogenous creation of DMT within the body that is responsible for these altered states, spiritual experiences, out-of-body experiences such as that. And what he outlines in this is actually pretty profound. And there's just a couple things I want to kind of speak about. The first thing he talks about is this idea of Theoneurology. So he compares it to the sort of modern consensus in the scientific community of Neurotheology. So what does this mean? Neurotheology would be the idea that it's the brain itself which creates these spiritual experiences and creates the impression, hallucination, so to say, of spiritual realities, of God, stuff like this. So this was his original hypothesis, kind of going along with the scientific consensus, trying to prove this idea of neurotheology. And what's surprising, as he outlines in this book, is according to his research and analysis that kind of followed, he realized that neurotheology actually doesn't really fit his findings and his results from the experiment. And instead, he's been proposing this sort of opposite hypothesis, or this idea of theoneurology, meaning that it's not the brain that creates these spiritual experiences, but it's actually a higher spiritual reality or God or some sort of transcendent reality that is creating this physical world. And it's actually the brain that is the transceiver or receiver of these higher spiritual realities. And so he kind of flips science on its head, saying that no, it's not matter that is creating spirit, but it's spirit that is creating matter. And this is a pretty profound result, pretty profound hypothesis. And it's something that, many of these ancient texts, many mystical traditions talk about, this idea that there's actually something that's creating this physical reality, and there is actually a soul that is transcendent. And so his findings from his original research between 1990 and 1995, based off of administering DMT to volunteers, kind of supports this hypothesis that there is this actual transcendent reality. And the other thing that I kind of want to talk about, which he goes into, is the idea of a sort of a new framework for spiritual experience. So Dr. Rick Strassman used to be a practicing Buddhist, so when he first conducted these studies, he kind of came to the experiment with a Buddhist lens, and so he was actually trying to apply some of the more Buddhist Eastern concepts to the DMT experience. And what he found was actually that it's not really these kind of Buddhist ideas in Eastern religions that really match up with the DMT experience, but it's actually the Western religion, specifically the Hebrew Bible, that more accurately sort of proposes a model for the DMT experience. So what does this mean? I guess to break it up, the way that he kind of talks about it in the book is he splits up spiritual experiences into sort of two categories, or two poles, you might say. So on one end, we have this mystical spiritual experience, which is a sort of unitive experience, where you can say you become one with the universe, you become one with God, you lose your individuality, you merge with the larger universe. And this is something that a lot of the Eastern traditions often talk about, particularly in yoga and in Buddhism. You know, Buddhists are always talking about this idea of non-self, that there is no individual self ultimately. And the goal of these practices is to kind of dissolve the self, the sense of self, to kind of merge back with a sort of unitive field. So this is sort of the Eastern model, which again, this is what he started. However, or started with. And then the other pole of spiritual experience, which he talks about, is this interactive and relational spiritual experience. What he terms, or what he labels as prophecy. And so this term prophecy is very interesting because, you know, a lot of us, when we hear the word prophecy, we think about a vision of the future or some sort of prediction of the future. And that's actually a more modern approach to that term. If you actually look into how prophecy, the word prophecy, and the concept of prophecy was used in its source, the Hebrew Bible, you find that it's actually not just a vision or prediction of the future, but it's more of a direct interaction with external spiritual realities, an interaction or relationship with beings such as angels, or directly with God itself. And so what he proposes in this book is that the DMT experience is actually more related to the idea of prophecy, this interactive and relational spiritual experience, than it is with the mystical or unitive spiritual experience. And so he posits that it's actually the Hebrew Bible which provides a sort of better model or framework to understand the DMT experience, particularly in Westerners who, for the most part, grew up with some sort of Western religious upbringing, either Christianity or Judaism. And so it's very interesting as he kind of compares the two, the idea of prophecy, the accounts of prophets throughout the Hebrew Bible, a lot of, you know, his kind of quotes and stories actually come from the stories of Ezekiel, who, you know, had many different visions. He also shows and talks about the visions of Moses and the prophecies of Moses, particularly the burning bush, and how these types of kind of stories within the Bible better relate to the experiences that he reported during his research into DMT. And so it's extremely fascinating stuff, especially for me, mainly because a lot of my personal psychedelic experiences stemming from mainly LSD, but also mushrooms, originally were more on this other spectrum, this sort of unitive, mystical, spiritual experience. You know, for me, I was constantly letting go of the mind and kind of releasing myself, becoming one with the universe, and something that I've always sort of aimed for in my psychedelic journeys, and something that I've been really interested in, is, you know, not just that the dissolving of the self, but also moving into a more interactive and relational visionary experience, one where you can communicate with beings, with spirits, you know, which is actually pretty common under DMT. And so this is extremely fascinating for me. Highly recommend it if you guys are interested in psychedelics or the sort of difference between spiritual experiences, the difference between Eastern models and Western models. Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of share that, as this is what I'm currently reading. I'm about halfway through and finding it very interesting. So I guess that's it for today. I hope you are all well, as usual. With love and light, may peace be with you.